Hello and welcome to this Adobe Illustrator video where we will be discussing typography and page layout. In the previous video and part 1 of exercise 6, we looked at how to create a poster using a numeral or letter and talked a little bit about point type versus area type, typing on a path, and inserting type into a shape. In this video, we're going to focus on page layout. So I have curated some serif and sans-serif fonts listed here, and those are located on Google Drive in the Resources folder, Google Fonts for Exercise 6, and here are those folders of fonts you can install. I've created a preview document so you can see each of those fonts and how they're used as headlines, subheadings, and paragraph or body copy. You can also download that selection of fonts directly on Google, and you can easily search and preview those fonts. So I want you to select 2 font families and no more than 3. You can use different weights within those families. For this layout, I want to make sure you include a large title or headline, a subheading, paragraph text using columns, and an image and or vector silhouette, which you will be wrapping text. And feel free to include any other interesting details, such as related words, pull quotes, or drop caps. I've listed some copyright-free image sources where you can browse those libraries to download images for this project. You'll want to make sure and use the workflow practices of creating a links folder to place those images and link them to your document. Before we get started, I have placed a link in the description to a Pinterest board with some really interesting typography examples and layouts. So I want you to look through those to see some creative ways that people are using type in an interesting way to create layouts and creating a visual based purely on typography. So these are a few layouts that I've created. And I've included 2 layouts using the same copy, but in completely different layouts, just to show the difference in the focus and hierarchy and how different the directions could be. So we're going to create a new document, or in this case, I'm going to create another artboard. And I have given you a few different placeholder text websites that you can copy text from for your layout, or you can choose another online article, story, or book, etc. So let's just grab one of these and generate some paragraphs of text. And I'm going to copy it, Command-C, and add a text box to my document by going to T or the Type tool. And I'm going to make a new layer since I'm already in a working document. And let's click and drag to create a text box. And I'm going to paste in Command-V, my new type. I'm going to check my preview document again so I can see which copy I like the best. Let's just go with Enter this time. So I'm going to select all of that text, and from my character palette, which is either up here or you can open it at Window, Type, Character, and now we have the character and paragraph palettes available. You'll want to go to this little flyout menu and select Show Options. With the text box selected, and after you've installed your fonts, we're going to do a search, and we can preview what these are going to look like. So we don't want something too thin. Let's go with Enter Regular. And I always select optical kerning. And for layouts, you generally do not want to go below 9-point font, just thinking about a broad range of demographics. So let's go with 10-point font, just based on the amount of copy we have right now. And we want to make this type into columns. So one way we can do that is with the type selected, go to Type, Area Type Options. And here we have rows and columns. I have never used rows, but for columns, you can increase the number of columns here, and you can do 2 or 3 columns. That's probably going to be the max. Let's start with 2, and you can adjust the gutter, which is the space between the columns. So let's just go with this for now. And you can see how unbalanced the columns are. So I can resize this text box to help balance those columns of text. Another thing I like to do with column text is in paragraph, I like to change it to justification with left alignment so that the bottom words that don't fill the space will be aligned left. And that helps visually create these columns versus a ragged edge, which is more uneven, and you would have to manually or visually try to make that as even as possible. Another option to consider for columned or body text is whether or not you want to hyphenate. Hyphenation can help with justification. However, if it's hyphenating way too many words, you may want to turn that off. So you can see how visually the space between these words changes whether or not we have hyphenation. And I'm going to increase the leading or line height of the font. So if we zoom out, this is looking pretty balanced, and we need to give a large headline to this layout. And if you need more copy, you can always generate more text. I'm not going to be reading the copy. I'm going to be more concerned about visual quality of the text. So let's grab a headline. And using the type tool, I'm just going to click to create a point type for this. So I can scale this holding down Shift so it's proportionately and we're not stretching the type. And maybe I want to take out the hyphens. And maybe I want this headline to be bolder. So I'm going to choose bold. And you can see the font size has changed as I scaled this. So you can make it fit the entire text box, or maybe you want to enlarge it. You can enlarge from the center and scale holding down Option Shift. And then we want to make sure that this content is centered on the page. So in your alignment tools, we want to align to artboard and horizontally align center. And in reading through this type, I'm trying to decide what type I want to use either as a subheading or a pull quote. And I'm just going to grab some of this text as a pull quote. So I'm going to do Command C to copy, and we're going to create another text box with the type tool, T, and paste the text into that new text box. And I'm going to see where this text is in the article. So it's over here. So maybe we want the pull quote to either come in from the side or maybe in the center, or maybe within the column itself. Let's look at a couple of things we can do, either with text wrap or inserting it into the column. So I'm going to go ahead and change this into point type for now. Going to type, convert to point type, and now we can more easily scale holding down Shift to really bring up this type. And now manually we can decide where those breakpoints will be. And I'm just going to tweak and adjust this copy. And this is a quote, so maybe we want to stylize and include an opening quotation mark. And that's not necessarily the most interesting quote, so I like to look through my other fonts to see what's available. So for this one, I think this is more appropriate. And I'm just reading to see how I want to break up so it reads nicely, and we don't want a word ending on its own line by itself. So this reads a little better to me. So I'm going to group this copy with Command G or Object Group. We're going to move this type up here, and we're going to make this text wrap around this block. So I don't really want it to wrap in this ragged edge. So I'm going to create a rectangle over this copy of where I want the text to wrap around. And you can change that to a stroke if it's easier to see. And now we're going to go to Object, Text Wrap, Make. And now you'll see that this rectangle, which has to be on top of the text in order for the text wrap to work. If we look at our layers panel, you can see it is above the text columns. So here's the rectangle and here's our body text. I do not want a stroke on that rectangle, so I'm going to remove the stroke color. And this is really tight to the edge, so I'm going to shift everything actually a little bit more. And maybe I want this quote to come up here. That looks like a nicer space. And we may need to change or shift this rectangle. And on this rectangle, you'll notice the distance of where the text wrap comes off of the rectangle. We can change that by going to Object, Text Wrap Options, which is way down at the bottom. And here with Preview turned on, we can adjust how far that wrap is happening off of the rectangle. So since it is a rectangle, it's pretty easy just to resize the rectangle itself. But there may be other instances if we had a specific shape that we may want to increase or decrease the text wrap. So you can see we do have overflowing types, so we do need to resize our text box to include everything. If I look back at one of my other layouts, you'll see that I did pull out another subheading. On this one, I took the paragraph and made it just one column. Same with this. I grabbed the first paragraph and made it fit the 3 columns, and then the body copy turned into 3 columns. So you can see just how different layouts can be using the same text. I'm going to continue playing with this type and making sure that instead of an empty return between paragraphs, I'm going to remove all of those so that we can select all of the paragraph type. And in the paragraph palette, we're going to add space after the paragraph. So we have more control over those paragraph spaces. So visually, I have plenty of white space around this pull quote. And if I'm just reading the copy, you don't want this paragraph copy to be or to leave one line here by itself. And this is a little bit strange how the U starts down there. So I'm going to do a soft return, Shift Enter to get that copy together so it reads better. I just made some other fine-tuning and tweaks. But looking at the actual article itself and thinking about the concept, what other elements can we add to this graphically? We've got a year right here, or maybe we want to do an image of the DeLorean, or maybe both. In this layout, you can see where I was trying some different locations for the year. So we've got the year up here, we've got the year from the side here, and we've also got it at the bottom. So those are some explorations using large type, but subtly with a low transparency. So say I decided to go with this one, then I would remove those other locations. Let's see what we can find related to this in images. So fortunately, it looks like we do have some options. I like this one for this exercise because it does have the white background. So you can download this to your links folder in the exercise project. So now I have it saved here in my links, and I can either go to File, Place, and navigate to the image, or I can just drag and drop the image onto the artboard. You can see it's quite large, so we need to scale that with Transform, and I'm going to give an estimate width. And we're going to create a custom text wrap around this car. So I'm going to shift this copy up, and I'm going to take the pen tool, P for shortcut, after I zoom in. And I'm going to draw roughly around this shape. And again, you can change that to a stroke to see. And we're going to go to Object, Text Wrap, Make, and remove the stroke. You can also see our shapes and layouts in outline view by going to View, Outline. And here you can see all the different shapes and text boxes that I've created and some of the alignment or guides. So I'm going to get out of outline view with Command Y or View, Outline. And you can see now we do have a text overflow. So now I may need to extend those columns a little bit more. Or maybe I need to adjust the leading. Or maybe I need to adjust the paragraph after spacing or the leading. Play around with this until everything fits. You may need to resize the image or the text wrap shape, or maybe this column gutter. I feel like we need some kind of subheading here. So I'm just going to do a search for some kind of relatable text. And I may want to convert this point type into area type and change the leading or line height. Maybe I like this wrapping. So I'm going to use the scale tool, S, and my alignment tools to align these objects to the selection. And holding down Option and your arrow keys will also adjust the leading, which is really quick. So with the scale tool, I'm going to click on this corner to use it as my anchor and scale this until it snaps. And maybe I need to take off paragraph justification and turn off hyphenation. Now I can change it back to point type. So it is a process on getting this layout to look right. And again, avoiding a single word by adjusting the tracking. So what I'm looking at now is the space around the document. We want plenty of breathing room between the type and the edge of the page. And in this particular layout, I don't think it's necessary to use a drop cap, but I do want to show you how to create that. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this artboard. Shift O will get me into editing my artboards. And you're welcome to do this too. Just create a copy of the artboard so you can play with the different layouts if you want to try something. So let's say I delete the quote and that box. And if I zoom in, let's say we want to make this I a drop cap. So I'm going to cut that I and paste it, Command V, and I'm going to scale this up so it fits about 3 lines of copy. And now I'm going to add another rectangle and put a text wrap on it. Remove the fill and this extra space. And now I can adjust the rectangle and play with the space and the font for this first drop cap. Or maybe we want to try centering this text. That looks a little better to me. So I can copy this on the artboard, Command C, delete this one on this artboard, and Command F to paste it in place and tweak it if necessary. Let's go ahead and add the year to this layout for another element. And let's scale it and decide a good place for this. I'm going to look at some different font weights, maybe change the tracking, and I definitely want to change the opacity and transparency. Let's bring that opacity way down, something like 10%. And depending on what your colors are, you may want to send that to the back. Or in your layers panel, you can rearrange the order of elements there. So now this year is at the bottom. We may want to lock it once we're happy with that location. So there's one location, maybe you want to copy it and test another location, rotating. And then you want to align this as close as you can to the edge if that's what you're trying to achieve. So I don't know that this is the perfect layout, but we do have some interest using the typography and pulling out some information to bring hierarchy to the article. Maybe now we want to start playing with the color palette. So like for these articles, I created a color palette and then I started integrating those. Same with this one. I started with black and white and started bringing in those colors, whether it's in headlines subtly, but you can see how I made these subsections uppercase and slightly bolder, or the subheading is larger. And in this instance, I used a serif for that drop cap and multiple drop caps on this one that were only 2 line height tall. So you can see my shape for this one was a little more complex, and I added a very subtle map that I found on Pixabay, or here, just a subtle graphic of the islands, which I could increase slightly to make that more apparent. Or on this one, I grabbed the word space and some numbers, or I thought of some other related words here and played with the tracking. So there are infinite ways to organize this information and to start adding colors. You may also try and explore different blend modes. So for instance, these numbers are using color dodge to create a more subtle effect. And this text, I'm using a couple of layers of type here, color dodge and overlay, maybe in different opacities. You can also create different sizes of type within the text area by selecting the text and changing the font size. And we may have to do a hard return to change this paragraph back to justified and adjust that paragraph after spacing. Another option within Illustrator is, let's say we like the styling of this subheading. If we go to Window, Type, and Character Styles, which will also include Paragraph Styles as a tab, we can save this as a heading type. So let's create a new style, and you can label that. And now we can copy or create new text and apply that same style. And same with these paragraphs where we added space after them. We can go into paragraph styles and we can either reset or redefine the native body style text with redefine paragraph styles, or we can create a new paragraph style. So now if I create a new text box, you can also sample other type. But if I do a return, it is using that same paragraph spacing. So you can copy the paragraph spacing by sampling with the eyedropper or clicking on that paragraph style. Another detail I want you to take note of is if we zoom in on this body copy, let's say we have another quote with quotation marks. The quote is currently aligned to this left edge. A setting we may want to turn on for this is in the paragraph styles. In the flyout, you can change it to Roman hanging punctuation. And I often use that just so this quote is outside of the column. It looks a little nicer than the previous where it's inset. So I want you to double check your mandatories, make sure you have all that information included. And here are some of the image sources. Before I forget, one last thing I wanted to demonstrate was how to mask an image. So this image is really overflowing the page, which when we go to save it, you're not going to notice. But if we're working on our document with multiple artboards, it may become problematic. And it's also easier to visualize the piece with it cropped. So even just to visualize this, we could go to View, Trim View to see the composition more clearly, or we can create a mask. So to do that, I'm going to grab a rectangle. It can be any shape. I've used a circle to mask the moon image. So I'm going to draw a rectangle over the image that I want to be visible. And with my black selection arrow, I'm going to select the rectangle and the image and go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make, which is Command 7. So if I open up my Layers panel, you'll see this has created a clipped group with that rectangle and the linked image. And I have cropped it to the bleed. If we need to, we can select the rectangle and adjust that. With the object selected here, we can adjust it with the black arrow, or you can use your white direct selection to grab part of the rectangle and move it. So you can see here that I would be cropping the image with that rectangle size. Once an image is masked, you can continue to scale that if you needed to. To release the clipping mask, just go to Object, Clipping Mask, release, and decide how you want to go from there. I hope this video helped you better understand how to flow text into columns, create text wraps, and create hierarchy using typography, as well as using point type versus area type. Thanks for watching, and take care.